Some stories are frightening because they make us believe monsters exist. Others are frightening because they force us to confront something far more disheartening. That sometimes the greatest tragedies happen when ordinary people are convinced they're doing the right thing. This isn't simply just a story about an exorcism. It's a story about faith, about illness, about desperation, and about how a young woman whose life has become one of the most controversial and heartbreaking cases in modern history. Nearly 50 years later after her death, people are still asking the same question. Was she possessed by something beyond human understanding? Or was she suffering from devastating neurological and psychiatric illnesses that were tragically misunderstood? Depending on who you ask, you'll hear two very different stories. One tells of a battle between good and evil. The other tells a catastrophic failure of medicine, religion, and those entrusted with caring for someone in desperate need. Tonight, we'll examine the documented history, the eyewitness accounts, and the enduring mystery surrounding the tragic life of Annalise Michel. This is Unsettling Stories. Annalise Michel was born on September 21st, 1952 in the small Bavarian town of Leipolfing, West Germany. She grew up in an intensely religious Catholic household. Faith wasn't simply something her family practiced on Sundays. It shaped every aspect of daily life. Prayer was routine. Church attendance was expected. Religious devotion wasn't optional. It was woven into the family's identity. Her parents had endured tremendous personal hardship before Annalise was born. The family carried deep feelings of guilt and a desire for spiritual redemption, creating an environment where sacrifice, suffering, and obedience to God were emphasized. By all accounts, Annalise was intelligent, thoughtful, and kind. Teachers described her as a capable student. Friends remembered her as shy but friendly. She enjoyed music. She laughed with classmates. She dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. Nothing in her childhood suggested she would eventually become the subject of one of the most famous exorcism cases in modern history. She wasn't fascinated by the occult or seeking attention. She wasn't known for violent behavior. She was in many ways an ordinary young woman with ordinary hopes, which makes what happened next all the more difficult to understand. In 1968, when Annalise was just 16 years old, everything changed. Without warning, she suffered a seizure. Doctors diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a neurological disorder that affects areas of the brain involved in memory, emotion, and perception. For many people, epilepsy only causes seizures. But temporal lobe epilepsy can also produce experiences that feel deeply unsettling. Some patients report vivid hallucinations. Others describe hearing voices, smelling odors that aren't there, or experiencing overwhelming feelings of fear and dread. Doctors prescribed medication hoping to control the situation. Initially, there was reason to believe treatment might help. But over time, Annalise's condition appeared to worsen. She began describing experiences that frightened both her and her family. She claimed to hear voices, reported seeing dark, threatening figures. She said invisible forces seemed to surround her. At times, she believed faces around her appeared distorted or frightening. She also described an overwhelming feeling that something evil was constantly nearby. These experiences were terrifying and deeply distressing. Medical professionals continued adjusting her treatment, believing her symptoms stemmed from neurological illness and increasingly psychiatric complications. But her family struggled to reconcile those explanations with what they were witnessing. As Annalise's behavior became more erratic, they began to wonder if medicine alone could explain what was happening. Over the coming months, her symptoms reportedly expanded beyond seizures. According to family members and later accounts, she began reacting intensely to religious objects. She sometimes claimed that she could not enter a church and said that holy water burned her. She reported that prayer had become nearly impossible. These claims have never been independently verified and remain part of the family's testimony rather than established medical fact. Nevertheless, they played a significant role in shaping how those around her interpreted her condition. For a deeply religious family, these experiences carried a meaning that went beyond medicine. To physicians, they suggested a serious neurological or psychiatric disorder. To her parents, they increasingly resembled descriptions they had encountered in religious teachings. The gap between those interpretations would only continue to widen, and it would eventually determine the course of Annalise's life. By the early 1970s, Annalise's condition had reportedly become more severe. According to her family and others who knew her, she experienced periods of profound emotional distress. She described hearing voices that mocked her and told her that she was damned. She believed she was being tormented by an unseen presence and spoke of feeling overwhelmingly despair. Her medications were changed several times and she was hospitalized on more than one occasion. Yet despite treatment, her symptoms persisted. As the years wore on, her family became convinced that something beyond illness was taking place. They later claimed that Annalise reacted violently to religious objects. They said she recoiled from crucifixes, refused blessed items, and claimed she could no longer pray. It is incredibly important to note that these accounts come primarily from family members and clergy who witnessed her behavior. They are part of the historical record, but they are not independently verifiable. Still, for a deeply religious Catholic family in Bavaria, these experiences carried enormous significance. To them, this wasn't simply an illness that medicine had failed to cure. It looked increasingly like spiritual warfare. Many people assume the Catholic Church eagerly performs exorcisms. In reality, the opposite is true. The Church has long required that natural explanations be ruled out before an exorcism is considered. Medical and psychiatric evaluations are expected, and alleged cases of possession are carefully scrutinized. When Annalise's family first approached priests for help, they were turned away. Several clergy believed she needed continued medical and psychiatric care, not an exorcism. That detail is often overlooked, but it's important. The Church itself was skeptical. Years passed, and her condition reportedly continued to deteriorate. Some priests who met with her later described behavior they found difficult to explain. They claimed she displayed an intense aversion to sacred objects, extraordinary physical strength during episodes of distress, and voices that sounded unlike her own. Whether these experiences had natural explanations or not remains the subject of debate. But to those priests, they were troubling enough to warrant further investigation. Eventually, detailed reports were sent to the local bishop. After reviewing the case, he granted permission for a formal exorcism. This was not a casual decision. Formal exorcisms are exceedingly rare, and approval requires authorization from church leadership. For Annalise's family, it felt like hope. For others, it marked the beginning of a terrible mistake. The first authorized exorcism took place in September of 1975. The ritual followed the traditional Roman rite of exorcism, a centuries-old set of prayers asking God to free a person believed to be under demonic influence. 2 priests were assigned to the case. Session after session, they returned to the Michel family home, sometimes once or twice a week. Each ritual could last for hours. Over the next 10 months, a total of 67 exorcism sessions would be performed. The priests kept notes. Some sessions were recorded on audio tape. Those recordings still exist today. Listening to them is outright disturbing. You hear screaming and crying, growling, and long stretches of prayer. At times, Annalise's voice shifts dramatically in tone and intensity. Supporters of the possession theory believe these recordings capture genuine supernatural manifestations. Skeptics argue they reflect the profound suffering of a young woman experiencing severe neurological illness, psychiatric distress, religious trauma, and physical exhaustion. The recordings themselves cannot answer that question. They simply document what occurred. As the exorcisms continued, witnesses described increasingly disturbing behavior. According to those present, Annalise sometimes barked like a dog. She growled, screamed for extended periods. She struck herself. She bit walls and furniture. She reportedly tore clothing, crawled beneath tables, and displayed sudden bursts of frantic movement. She was also said to perform hundreds of genuflections, kneeling repeatedly in prayer, sometimes several hundred in a single day. The repeated strain severely damaged her knees. By this point, she was becoming physically weaker. Eating had become inconsistent. Her health continued to decline. Those around her interpreted what they were seeing in very different ways. To the priests, these behaviors reinforced their belief that the exorcism needed to continue. To medical professionals who later reviewed the case, many of these actions could be understood through the lens of severe mental illness, neurological disease, religious delusions, and prolonged malnutrition. The tragedy is that both groups believed they were helping, but they were moving in opposite directions. One of the most sensational aspects of Annalise's case involves the voices captured during the exorcisms. According to the priests, different voices identify themselves as various historical and biblical figures, including Lucifer, Judas Iscariot, Cain, Nero, and even Adolf Hitler. These names became central to the mythology surrounding the case. For believers, they were evidence of demonic possession. For psychologists and psychiatrists, they were consistent with dissociative states, psychosis, or the influence of deeply held religious beliefs shaping the content of hallucinations. It's worth remembering that the human mind is capable of remarkable things under extreme stress. People experiencing severe psychiatric illness can speak in altered voices, adopt different identities, or express beliefs that feel absolutely real to them. That does not diminish their suffering. If anything, it highlights just how devastating these illnesses can be. As the months passed, Annalise's physical condition became impossible to ignore. She grew thinner, weaker, and more exhausted. She often spent hours in prayer. Her body was beginning to fail, yet the closest to her remained convinced that they were nearing a breakthrough. Some believed the worsening condition was proof that the demons were resisting. Others believed that enduring suffering brought her closer to God. Meanwhile, doctors were no longer directing her care. The focus had shifted almost entirely from medicine to exorcism. Looking back today, this shift remains one of the most controversial aspects of this case. It raises difficult questions. Can faith and medicine work together? When should one take precedence over the other? And how do we recognize when sincere belief may be preventing someone from receiving life-saving treatment? There are no easy answers, only the knowledge of how this story ends. By the summer of 1976, Annalise's health had deteriorated dramatically. She was severely malnourished and dehydrated. She was physically exhausted after months of repeated exorcism rituals and declining health. Accounts from those close to her describe a young woman who could barely stand. Simple tasks had become overwhelming. Her body, already weakened by years of illness, no longer had the strength to endure. And yet, the exorcisms continued. According to those present, Annalise herself believed that her suffering had meaning. She reportedly spoke of enduring pain as a sacrifice for others and believed she had a spiritual mission to fulfill. Whether these beliefs were expressions of profound religious devotion, symptoms of mental illness, or some combination of the two is something no one can answer with certainty. On July 1st, 1976, Annalise Michel died in her family's home. The official findings concluded that she died from malnutrition and dehydration after prolonged illness. She was 23 years old. News of her death spread quickly across Germany. What had been a private struggle inside one family's home suddenly became an international story. And before long, authorities began asking a difficult question. Could this death have been prevented? An investigation followed. Medical experts testified that in their opinion, Annelise's life could have likely been saved if she had received consistent medical treatment and nutritional support. Prosecutors argued that the warning signs had been obvious. Her declining weight, her inability to care for herself, her worsening physical condition all pointed to someone in desperate need of medical intervention. Charges of negligent homicide were filed against 4 people: Annelise's mother, father, and the 2 priests who had conducted the exorcisms. The defense presented a very different picture. They argued that everyone involved genuinely believed they were helping. The priests believed they were carrying out their religious duty. Her parents believed they were following the guidance of trusted spiritual leaders while trying to save their daughter. There was no evidence that anyone intended to harm Annalise. Instead, the trial centered on whether sincere belief could excuse the failure to seek life-saving medical care. The court ultimately found all 4 defendants guilty of negligent homicide. Each received a suspended sentence and probation rather than prison time. Legally, the case was over. But socially, the debate had only just begun. One reason this story continues to fascinate people decades later is because it isn't based solely on written accounts. Dozens of hours of audio recordings from the exorcism still exist. If you've ever encountered clips online, you've probably heard the guttural screams, the strained voices, and the emotional intensity captured on those tapes. They're undeniably unsettling. But it's important to remember what those recordings can and cannot tell us. They document a real woman in profound distress. They capture rituals that truly took place. What they do not prove is the cause of that distress. Some listeners hear evidence of possession. Others hear the cries of someone experiencing severe neurological disease, psychiatric illness, extreme physical weakness, or a combination of all 3. The recordings themselves remain open to interpretation, and that's why they continue to draw so much attention. Annalise Michel's death had lasting consequences beyond the courtroom. It reignited conversations within the Catholic Church about the role of exorcism, the importance of medical evaluation, and the responsibility of clergy when confronted with claims of possession. Modern Catholic practice places significant emphasis on ruling out medical and psychiatric conditions before approving a formal exorcism. The Church has repeatedly stated that many cases initially believed to involve the supernatural are ultimately found to have natural explanations. That doesn't mean the Church rejects the possibility of possession, but it does mean that today's process is generally more cautious and collaborative than many people realize. As of today, almost 50 years have passed, and still, people disagree. Those who believe Annalise was possessed often point to the eyewitness testimony, the audio recordings, and sincerity of the priests and family. They ask how so many people could have witnessed such extraordinary behavior. Those who reject a supernatural explanation point to her epilepsy, her psychiatric symptoms, her deeply religious upbringing, and the devastating effects of prolonged malnutrition. They argue that every reported event can be understood through medicine and psychology. The truth is, no one can revisit 1976. No one can perform new examinations. No one can separate every symptom from every belief with absolute certainty. I feel one of the greatest tragedies in this story is that it doesn't have a villain in the traditional sense. There was no shadowy figure plotting against Annalise, no obvious monster hiding in the darkness. Instead, there were parents who loved their daughter, priests who believed they were saving a soul, doctors who tried to treat an illness they didn't fully understand. And at the center of it all, a young woman caught between two worlds. Whether you believe Annalise Michel was suffering from demonic possession, a devastating medical condition, or something that lays somewhere between those two possibilities, her story reminds us of something profoundly important. When someone is suffering, every reasonable avenue of care deserves to be explored. Because once a life is gone, no debate, no verdict, and no explanation can bring it back. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Unsettling Stories. If this story made you think, or if you have your own perspective on the case, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Please keep the discussion respectful. This is a real story about a real person, and regardless of where you stand, Annalise Michel deserves to be remembered with dignity. Until next time, stay curious.